Hello everyone, we are today with Gifton, and I have a question actually from Kampf mit Kette, Ketty. He's a German Panzer grenadier, and he wants to know what wrong lessons are taken so far from the Ukraine war in Europe.
Oh, what do people think are lessons that actually aren't?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good. That's actually a very good one, because I have a feeling it'll take a fair bit of analysis to figure out what actually is and isn't a viable lesson.
Yeah.
Because I know certainly the US Army is still looking at this, and it's an ongoing war. We'll see. So lessons like the tank is obsolete. Well, okay, that's a wrong lesson.
Yeah, we made both a video about it.
But both and the other discussions I'm having with other people as well. In the doctrine and procurement worlds, it's kind of like, no, the tank's not going anywhere. The drone will win everything. That one is also a wrong lesson. So that really started after the Nagorno-Karabakh war.
Yeah, I already got an email back then that somebody told me the tank will be over, and I said, yeah, I heard that before.
Yeah. And not just because of the anti-tank capability, but simply because of the amount of drones are going around and the amount of advantage. Yeah, but there have been a couple of articles since then that have looked into the concept, and the general result is the drone is a force multiplier like anything else. If you have it and you know how to use it, like if you have good artillery and you know how to use it, or if you have good jamming capability and you know how to use it, it will help you win better. But drone alone doesn't do you any good whatsoever, especially if the opposition has reasonable anti-drone warfare capability. And for the last few years, a lot of countries have been looking very heavily at anti-drone capability. We haven't necessarily fielded all the answers yet. So yeah, in theory, if half the countries in the world today go to war against drones the day after tomorrow, they'd take a lot more casualties than they would need to. But that's going to be a very, very short window of opportunity. It's been known as a problem for years, and smart people have been thinking about it. So tanks going away is a non-entity, or it's a non-lesson. The drone being the be-all and end-all is a non-lesson. What other subjects?
The drones are certainly comparable to the early tanks in that sense that. Because in Poland and particularly in France, the tanks could break through because there was not a defense in depth. Then the French didn't put down a lot of anti-tank mines and all the other problems. So that like the defensive doctrine and weapon systems and capabilities were so low, which we have now with the drones as well. There's the ability for Ukraine and also especially for Russia to counter drones seems, I say seems because we have to wait for the studies, because what we mostly now see is the TikTok war, and this is what both sides select to publish and also what both sides were able to capture. So basically you have a pyramid, this is the very top we see, and then there's everything was recorded and edited, and then there's everything that was recorded, and then there's actually what actually happened to a certain degree, because there might be a lot of even more ridiculous stuff that happened we didn't see, but there might be likely as way more mundane regular combat happening, which is not that much different.
I suspect there's going to be a lot of effort spent on the lesson learned of location security. So, ultimately, you can't guarantee that you're not going to get spotted by a drone. You can't guarantee you're not going to get spotted by a satellite or a high-flying aircraft, or even your electromagnetic signature of your radios are going to get triangulated. Joe Snuffy has brought his mobile phone. Well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
There's an argument that what the British do is they'll collect the SIM cards, so you can't connect to the network, but you can still keep your phone, so you can take your snapshots and when you get home.
But how easy is it to hide a SIM card?
So if the enemy has capability of identifying SIM cards in your area, you probably do as well, and can track it down. Because one of the other things that's happening is that part of the reason that Ukraine is winning the propaganda war is they're the ones that have the cameras, because everybody's got a cell phone. So that doesn't mean to say that anybody should be able to just go take a video of a combat action and then upload it onto Twitter. The army is not going to like that. But if nobody has an ability to capture what's going on at all, then that can never be turned into propaganda footage. So the footage still needs to be recorded. It needs to be sent through whatever the current doctrinal term is for your country of propaganda warfare. It used to not be a bad word. Propaganda was just a neutral word. Now it's turned into a bad word. But the meaning is the same.
In Spanish, I think, at least in South America, it still means advertisement.
Yeah.
Because I was in South America and I remember there was a leaflet on the car and the guy said, "Oh, just propaganda." And I really shrugged.
Yeah.
Because, and then, okay, advertisement.
Yeah, no, historically the word was neutral. And so in order for your information operations people to make the most of it, you have to be able to record it in the first place. And I don't think the army is going to be paying millions of dollars to give everybody a GoPro.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe they might see how big the IO budget is, but realistically, it's people on the ground who have their cell phones, because that's where their camera is these days. People don't buy separate cameras much anymore, and they'll take their holiday snaps that they can show their grandson when 80 years down the line. This was me in the war. So that's the ability to capture things that are useful for the propaganda war, the information war, and so that is a balance that has to be struck. How do you maintain information security? Because you don't want to, I photographed myself in front of this building and I've now identified where the hell I am.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing you want to make sure doesn't happen. But at the other time, you also want to take advantage of the opportunities provided. I have a feeling that this is going to be a debate that is not going to be settled for many years.
Yeah, the operational security debate will be quite extensive in many aspects.
So, I mean, if you're talking about lessons that are wrong, cell phones have no place in the battlefield. That is the immediate response probably from the security guys, from the protection cells, but it may not actually be the correct answer. It's like saying for an IT guy, the most secure computer in the world that cannot be hacked into is unplugged in a safe on a desert island. Yeah. The cybersecurity guy is happy. This computer is safe. It's not in use.
I mean, the main question about the operation security and basically the information war there is also, do you need it, for instance, in some cases, for a Western country, for instance, if they are fighting in Afghanistan? Yeah. Do you really? I think for then it actually probably makes sense that almost nothing comes out from the combat footage.
Yeah.
Whereas for Ukraine, it's very important to show them how they are fighting, how they are defeating.
We can still win this.
So there's also the question. So for a Western country, United States fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq, it could make absolutely sense that there's as few footage as possible, because it's a completely different thing, because you have to keep basically information off the news that don't people call back your armed forces or something else. Whereas for Ukraine, it's the complete opposite way. So that's also where is your country, what is your situation, what does your war look like? That's not like a cookie cutter response, okay, yeah, that makes sense for everyone. It's usually not the case.
Other lessons that are bad, the logisticians are going to be looking into this one for years as well. Ammunition consumption rates, of course, being the big one.
Different weapon systems they have.
I mean, the person in charge of Ukrainian logistics must be ripping his hair out. Oh, we've got 3 of the MLRS that the Germans have just donated us 2 more of these things, which are based off of Bradley chassis. I mean, fantastic. What the hell are you just gave us a dozen Panzer howitzers, which have an entirely different chassis, and what was this other thing? 16 Gepards. Well, that's a Leopard 1 chassis. Well, we got no Leopard 1s here. The Australians have given us Bushmasters. The Slovenians, okay, T-55, maybe we can still find some T-55 parts in the storage. Oh, we got this coming over. Okay, so we got the electronic system that we need for this anti-aircraft radar from the British. The Canadians have sent us this artillery piece. The Polish have sent us the Polish have sent us half the Polish army, and the Baltic states have done the same. The Baltic states have probably given, you want to go kill Russians? Yeah. Go kill Russians. Yeah, fantastic.
And then the Germans and Australians from East German, where a lot of apparently didn't work or something. Then I think I saw an Italian version of the MG42 or some derivative of an MG42 variant, because you could see it. And
maybe the Austrians shipped them something.
Yeah, that would be the MG. But officially we are neutral. We are actually, I mean,
You sell weapons.
Yeah. We are, according to law professor, according to joining since the European Union in '95, and we didn't take the road that Ireland take. You could take. We're actually not neutral at all. It's actually and it wasn't override by the law, but apparently it's still for our public, for our politicians and everything. It's still the holy cow.
Because obviously the Ukrainians have figured out how to do it, because otherwise they would be saying, stop sending us onesies, twosies. If you can't send us a reasonable amount, don't bother at all. So the Ukrainians have obviously solved this somehow.
I guess they use it to a certain degree until they can't use it anymore, or they sustain so much losses that it doesn't matter anyway in certain areas, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, the reports that come out of this in about 5 years after the war is over are going to be fascinating. I mean, I'll tell you that much. Other lessons that aren't, or that are being wrongly learned. The problem is that I would need to know what the lessons are that are being learned both wrongly and correctly, and I don't think they've been publicly identified yet. So I mean, we can talk basically what people publicly know, like the old tank is obsolete. It was not. I think the opinion of most professionals. It was mostly journalists and others. So what other things do? I mean, I know there are certainly lessons being learned because they get distributed on you got to have the classified network on the U.S. Army, but there's a whole bunch of lessons learned. Lessons. I mean, for some reason, the Russians have taken the lesson that if you destroy infrastructure, if you deny Europe the ability to heat themselves from gas, they will win. That apparently is an incorrect lesson.
I mean, that is an incorrect lesson all the time, because basically terror bombing, I think, did it ever work? Did it ever work? The Germans thought the British would give him the bomb, then the British thought the Germans would give him the bomb, then it didn't happen. And it didn't happen in Vietnam. It didn't happen. There might be some instances where countries gave in because there was more or less terror bombing. We should also add here terror bombing initially, for instance, for the Battle of Britain. Both sides tried to avoid hit civilian targets, but it was basically
not possible.
Yeah, it was not possible because they were lucky if they hit in within one or 10 kilometers sometimes at that point. So, but initially it's well documented for both sides. They wanted to avoid hit civilian targets, and then at one point they say, okay, let's go.
No, I can't think of any time that making the population uncomfortable has ever had any effect. Now it's we're being terror bombed because we realize there's absolutely nothing we can do about it, and there's no point in fighting anymore. That's a different reason. That's just we can't win. We're uncomfortable.
Well, and I think this is a bit similar to that discussion because I heard it many times what people call the post-heroic generation or something. So that I saw a graph where people, it was mentioned for different countries how many of them were willing to fight for their country.
Yes.
And for instance, Germany and Austria were rather low, and for instance, Peru was really high, and that was in Peru at one point. Yeah, and I saw on a national day the army parade in Trujillo, which is a rather large town in the north, and they couldn't walk in lockstep, and it was a professional army.
Yeah,
and I remember we had like maybe 8 weeks in our. And everyone could in my company walk in a lockstep. Now, okay, walking in a lockstep has nothing to do with combat effectiveness, but generally it shows a little bit of how much discipline works and everything.
Pride and discipline.
And everything else. So for me, the question is also how the question was asked. Because if you ask me, are you going to war for your country? I said, no. But if they say, okay, if that or that country invades your country and starts killing people on your side.
Especially if it's a country that you have a history of not liking, like Turkey and Greece or something.
Yeah, or I mean, neighboring country for Austria. It's just for some reason there is a war with a neighboring country or something, and they come to my country. Well, that's something different. I'm not going to fight a war for Austria necessarily, but if they start killing people on our border or something invading, then I probably might volunteer. Maybe I just run away. I'm not making any claims for heroics or something else, and I don't know how I perform under fire or anything. But there's quite a difference because also it doesn't happen from today to tomorrow. Right now, we are living peaceful. Who would attack us? Nobody in Austria right now, around the neighboring countries. But if it comes to war with one of the neighboring countries, you have like probably several years of ongoing different conflicts, of ongoing information and hostilities, and then the whole aspect changed. The same would be now, what if like people in Germany and Austria start freezing, and it's apparent because we are not getting Russian gas anymore. The question is, how many people will get angry about our government or at Russia? That's the question. Because generally, I guess, some portion will be blaming our government, but I think the majority would be say, okay, they will be angry at Russia. And so I think the resolve would actually go up. And that's more or less what happens historically anyway. Yeah, and that's the thing, because I had recently the discussion, because that is always, you have always the previous generation blaming, saying, with you guys, we couldn't have won a war at all. We had no chance. And then, the Second World War happened, and suddenly all those losers suddenly fought extremely well. So for me, that's always like this notion of the decadent West. And I think there's the best point which I ever saw in a Star Trek. In a Star Trek series, and I think it was a Ferengi talking about the humans. And he said, I'm actually most scared about the humans, because generally in Star Trek, except in the new ones, the Picard, but they are not lower. So they're just stupid. That is not Star Trek. They smoke, they swear, they do everything what Star Trek was not about. So it's completely bonkers. Anyway, so basically you say, the humans are very diplomatic, friendly, they try to do everything right and everything else. But once you take away their regular sleep, their food, they get as angry as the Klingons.
Yep, that was Quark talking to Nog.
Yeah, I think it was, they were fighting on their own planet. It was a siege or something. Yeah, and that was that scene. And he made basically the point. And I think that is also what comes down to the West, because the Nazis, all the others say, the Americans, once they lose one, once they get bombed, they let them the tail behind their legs and run away. And everything. Never happened. Never happened so far, and I don't think it will happen. And I don't particularly like the next generation or the one after me. So I'm also, but I think from history, if they're good to put bad in a bad spot and there's a necessity, I think they will stand up like previous generations did as well.
But it's one of those other questions. So, the Russians are not doing too well. But the longer the war goes on, the longer the Russians have to sort themselves out. I mean, they weren't too great in 1939 against Finland. The war went on, they sorted themselves out. And that's
the same against
my
Germany.
concern.
Yeah. So back to the non-lessons, the other would be that the Russians would be not able to learn. Or not. Or what?
Has that been a lesson? Or has that been perceived as a lesson?
Basically, you said in one of your Ukraine videos that you're actually shocked at the incompetence of the Russian army.
I am. But that, again, it was early. So this was back, I've recorded that video back in the times where we're getting everyday videos of TB2 strikes. The drones blowing things up, the 40-mile convoy and so on. Then all of a sudden, those videos went away, because the Russians realized maybe we should turn on our air defense systems, which is a pretty damn basic thing to not get right. But it looks like they turned them on. And then all of a sudden, we're not getting TB2 videos anymore for a very long time, until now we've given them harms and God knows what else to deal with the air defense systems. So I think that was the first indicator that we had that the Russians were capable of learning even today.
But I think I never saw it anywhere brought up. Basically, generally, what I see that the meme is that the Russians don't learn and they just throw more material, which seems to sound like a trope from World War II, which was also not correct then.
And you would be correct by saying that, but I don't know if I've seen that myself.
It's more implied, it's not explicitly stated. I mean, what you see on Twitter, generally, there's this meme where they put one soldier there. I think it's Ukrainian. It says, "We're just lucky that they're so extremely."
Yeah, I remember seeing that. So the question, so again, you were mentioning earlier about what we have been allowed to see. So we have seen the videos of the guys who get mobilized on Monday, and they're captured by Sunday. And but is that all of the people, or are they keeping some aside? They're sending who they need to right now just to keep the line stable, and training themselves a proper core that they can use later. And maybe the intel folks know, because I don't, because I'm not. Even if I did, I wouldn't be allowed to say.
Also, there's another aspect. Prisoners of war is actually quite a logistical burden.
They are.
And I mean, would they put in sleeper agents or something? Even I don't think they would do that. But that could also be something how you can get. Because if they take in so many that they get lax in their security and something else, this could also be.
That's possible. I think you have to assume that if the Ukrainians capture somebody, they'll put them in a proper prison, and they're not.
Yeah, but you're limited on everything because.
Yeah, but the Ukrainians are getting food supplies and everything else in from. I don't think that's a concern. More of a concern was, let's open up our borders to the Russians that are trying to escape the draft. And so, well, if all you're doing is you're letting in all these military-aged males who don't want to fight, one or two of those military-aged males may actually be in the service of the FSB or
we should have already learned that a few years ago.
But that's a different topic. But I mean, I kind of wonder if the Ukrainians are doing the same thing. I mean, if I were the Ukrainians, and I'm doing as well as I am, I would take like a brigade-sized element, and I would write them off for a year, 8 months to a year. And all I would be doing with them is training the hell out of them, preferably on new NATO equipment that's coming. Doing nothing but train. So when they do hit the front, they are to the standards of a modern Western country and will kick ass accordingly. And if they can afford to do that with an entire division at a time, so much better. Again, it's not as if the Ukrainians are advertising how many of their guys they have where, and I don't blame them. But the Russians could, in theory, be doing the same thing. I don't know if they are or not. But it's something I think the Ukrainians have to plan for. Because if all of a sudden a competent division-sized element shows up on their border and starts attacking, then the Ukrainians are going to have to flex on that.
Yeah, definitely.
But then this is all pure hypothetics and speculation because I don't have any more information than Bernard does, or probably than you do, unless you happen to be working in that field. So this is us just rambling along for half an hour for your entertainment and speaking aloud.
So any more non-lessons? Or wrong lessons, basically, that could be learned?
Are Airmobile units obsolete?
Yeah. I would say no.
Well, I'm sure the 101st and the 82nd in the U.S. Army would certainly say no as well. Somebody made an observation. Historically, air assault units have taken more casualties than their operations have been worth from World War II onwards. I don't know if that is actually true, but it's an interesting hypothesis.
The question is also the why, because I mean, if you look at it, if you do an air landing like on Creek and then you attack fortified positions, well, if you take regular infantry to attack fortified positions, you also take a huge amount of losses. So there's that point. And some people say, that the Germans didn't do an air landing or an airborne assault afterwards. But that has also other reasons as well.
So in the training for World War II that the US did back in 1940.
And it's light infantry generally, this is also the thing. Because if you don't have heavy equipment, you take more losses. That's the thing.
Yeah, so in the 1940 and 41 maneuvers, the paratroopers were involved. And what was interesting about it is multiple different generals were given these paratrooper units in the wars. And they were always used in a sacrificial manner, knowing that they could not be recovered, that they could not be saved, but on the expectation that the amount of havoc that they will cause in the enemy rear areas would actually reap dividends for the entire rest of the army. So, you 100 guys will die. Sorry, sucks to be you. Just make sure you make enough of a mess that these 1,000 guys over here can get across the bridge without getting hammered themselves. Now, are we ruthless enough in the West to do that? We were in 1940 and 41, but those are exercises.
Yeah, I always this with exercise. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very different. For instance, for Vietnam, definitely not anymore.
So now there's the expectation, at least with the 101st, if you fly them in with helicopters, you can probably get them out with helicopters. But if you chuck them out of airplanes like the 82nd, you either have a plan to get them out or they die in place.
I mean, you also have a lot of air power in the United States, so you can you can support an encirclement.
Yeah.
I think you did a Kherson, or no, in Korea, where the Marines were encircled, I think.
I'd have to remind.
Because some person said about the Stalingrad situation, the Americans did it in Korea, and I said, man, you're comparing not apples with oranges. You're comparing a bread basket with a.
The Busan perimeter was not an isolated unit, and I don't think any units that survived very long in isolation, let's say in Chosin or wherever.
Yeah, and the thing is with the 6th Army, I mean, this was far larger, and they were already on their last leg before they were encircled. Yeah. On the logistical side, it's something I covered in the video, which most people don't know because they think the encirclement and then everything brought up. No, before they had already the problems, yeah, so and I don't think the Marines there in Korea were short.
Yeah, so losing the VDV at places like Hostomel, I think was a failure of planning for what if something doesn't go right.
Yeah, and I mean, there was as far as I know, there was a Ukrainian unit nearby, and they immediately counterattacked.
Yeah. So maybe that was an intel failure as well. I mean, where have we seen that before? Arnhem, and so on. I mean, what do we actually take from the VDV failure at Hostomel? Do we take that heliborne assaults, deep heliborne assaults, are always a really, really bad idea, or do we just say that? What were they trying to do? That could have worked, but they just needed to have done this.
Yeah, and I think it seems it was a strategic intelligence failure on the aspect that they assumed that the Ukrainians to a certain part would not fight.
Yeah, and that their ground troops would have linked up and saved them or something.
Yeah, along those lines. So I guess they had like the strategic failure, and the operational was that they would be reached by their ground troops. Yeah. I mean, they did a second attack on the Hostomel was 24th to 25th. And was northeast or northwest of Kiev, and the other one was southwest on the 26th, which was also failed, but nobody really talks about that one. I recently found that out when I took a look at the last months of the war. And that was actually also the day, but I'm not sure if that's linked or not, which according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the most attacks against military objects were conducted. They conducted more than twice or 3 times the amount what they did in the 2 days before. That was I think the largest spike in the war. So it might be actually that they tried it again, and this time supported with a lot of air attack, but it could be also directed somewhere else because I don't know. I just know that the number went up on the 3rd day, which for me is an indicator when you don't bring the air force on the 1st and 2nd day, that is either an error, but I think it was done deliberately, assuming, okay, you hit as few as possible because you want to just take over.
Yeah. I guess so in addition to the tank being obsolete, is the large warship obsolete?
What do you define as a large warship? An aircraft carrier? A frigate?
Moskva is not a small ship. I mean, she's definitely was cruiser-sized.
Is there something comparable in the Western arsenal? Because the Tinko-Gorongo is, I think, is smaller.
No, I think it might be smaller than Tinko. The problem is that Slava was designed, or what do they call it? Moskva, I guess they renamed her. Again, I started playing Harpoon many years ago, back in the Cold War days, as an anti-ship vessel, and the U.S. basically turned their carriers into anti-ship vessels.
Yeah.
The Tychos were more of a
missile defense,
air defense. Yeah. Whilst Moskva had a competent, in theory, air defense system, it wasn't as good as a Tychos or Burks. But either way, they got hit by a couple of shore-launched missiles. Well, that's not new. Glamorgan got hit by a shore-launched missile in the Falklands. Or these little 8-foot unmanned surface vehicle, unmanned boats, which I have a feeling that if you're awake and looking for the things, they shouldn't be too hard to kill.
I guess you can also design specific defenses for them in the future. There will be, and there's also the thing with jamming, because I think you can jam these things probably. Because they need input, and since they send out, I mean, the thing is, these unmanned vehicles, they need to send and they need to receive. So you should be able to detect them,
and usually over a long enough distance.
Yeah. So there must be a signal. So you just it's a bit like with the Stealth bomber, the F-117. The Serbians shot them down because they knew how to tune their radar for it. And I assume the electronic...
They flew the same course multiple times, thinking they were invulnerable, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, that was probably conducted for that, but you still need to hit it with a missile, yeah? And so, here's the thing. I think the electronic warfare guys, which I have no idea, but they can figure out more or less how to detect or jam such a vehicle coming to a certain range. And for instance, for a drone that is far away for spotting, it might be a bit of a problem, but for a ship that comes closer, it must become close enough. Yeah. Of course, then you can could program an automated system in the drone. Then when it's close enough that it gets jammed, that it does image recognition and just heads on the one target. And maybe that is already in those thingies. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
But that would be the next step. But then again, and then you go the next step further, measure and countermeasure, then you just develop for the defense a thing that homes in on that thing. And then the next countermeasure would be that they drive it there, then they turn off the response and go in autonomous mode dead. And then there will be the next countermeasure for the defensive side.
We've been doing this for 2,000 years and more. So, but yeah, I not only is air defense now a thing again in the US, I have a very strong suspicion that the EW guys are going to get a lot more busy. And that leads to another lesson that seems to be being learned, not directly, but I don't think it's correct. If you look at the new Panther and the EMBT, they have a spare position in the tank for a EW operator or a drone operator.
Already on that low level, because that was the next question I wanted to ask you. Where's the electronic warfare? Where is it on the organizational level? Is it
probably company?
So it's in company headquarters.
I would put it in company. I think putting in a tank is a stupid idea because it's something that doesn't have to be in the tank to work. And anything that doesn't have to be on a tank shouldn't be on it.
Yeah, because a tank is an individual, and you generally don't use a tank alone.
Yeah. So I mean, somebody will say, no, he's the drone operator for the platoon or the company. I still think that you're better off with a dedicated vehicle, a Humvee or JLTV, one terrain feature behind, and that will do the operation for you because you're taking up space and armor inside the tank for something that doesn't have to be inside the tank. And they've done, no, I have my own rant coming out about that later. But
so basically, yeah, I mean, currently you could say that they show us the command tank version.
That's one of the other things to say. Oh, yeah, put the company commander inside this spare seat on the Panther. It's got is that necessary? Because so far for the last 80 years, company commanders have done quite happily from the turret of their tank. In 91, Brigadier Cordingley commanded his entire brigade from the turret of his tank. I mean, I think that's a solution in search of a problem or a solution in search of a marketing PR advert.
I mean, these are basically showcase tanks. So I guess they go to the basic possibilities, and then from the army there comes the requirements.
Yeah.
And then
and to say if you don't want the person, then you can put an extra 10 rounds of ammunition. I'll take the ammunition.
I don't want the nerd. I want the ammo.
It's like you've only got 20 rounds in the back. It's for the Panzer. It's like you can put 10 rounds externally on like the Russian fuel tanks. 10 rounds of ammunition externally on the back of the tank. If that is the cost of putting somebody in the front seat, Yeah, no, put the ammunition actually inside the tank. No. Rant aside. All right. I think we've ranted on that. I mean, and I've probably unnecessarily offended a whole bunch of people as well. But I'm trying to view this as academically as possible.
We all do. Oh no, not we all do. Very few people try to do this. So, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.